I ultimately cost a property management company its entire business, got the owner's real estate license permanently revoked, and it all started because they decided to extort my best tenant over a single bounce check. I own a few residential properties. For a long time, I handled everything myself, but as my primary business grew, it demanded my full attention. So, I decided to hire a property management company. These companies are supposed to make life easier. They handle repairs, screen new tenants, and manage evictions, all for a reasonable monthly fee deducted from the rent they collect for you. After some research, I settled on a company I'll call Apex Property Management, or APM. They seemed perfect on paper, a local firm, well established in the community, with friendly staff. My main goal was to get my vacant properties marketed and filled with good tenants, and they seemed like the right people for the job. Most of my properties were empty at the time, but a few were occupied. Among them was my favorite tenant, a man we'll call Mark, who lived in my high-end condo. I had personally screened and approved Mark long before APM was in the picture. He was the gold standard of tenants, rented from me for 3 years, always paid on time, and even handled minor repairs himself without asking for a cent off the rent. He was a non-smoker and kept the place immaculate. We'd even become good friends after he expressed interest in one day buying the condo. Finding a tenant like him for that specific property was a huge win, as not many people in the area could easily qualify. Once I hired APM, I notified all my existing tenants, including Mark, that the company would be handling everything going forward and that they'd need to sign a new lease. Everyone complied, and for about a year, everything was smooth sailing. The money rolled in without any issues. One red flag I should have paid more attention to was the high turnover at APM. My designated representative seemed to change every 3 months, but my portfolio had grown, and I had become one of their favorite clients because my higher-end properties meant more commission for them. They were constantly telling me how much they loved doing business with me. Then, Mark hit a rough patch. He lost his job for a couple of months, but incredibly, he still managed to pay his rent on time. I was immensely grateful for this, as a vacancy in that condo would have been very costly for me. 2 months after Mark started a new job, his rent check for March bounced. It was a simple, frustrating issue with his bank's overdraft system. The payment even showed as cleared for a few days before it was suddenly returned. This was the first time Mark had ever had any issue with payment in over 3 years. APM had already sent me my monthly payment, which included Mark's rent, so neither of us knew there was a problem. Here's where APM's incompetence began. First, they waited a week just to deposit the check. Then, after it bounced, they waited another week to notify Mark. By the time he found out, nearly half a month had passed, and rent for April was just around the corner. Suddenly, he was expected to come up with 2 months' rent almost at once, which was an impossible situation for anyone just getting back on their feet. Instead of handling this with a modicum of understanding, APM went nuclear. They gave Mark a 24-hour ultimatum: pay the full amount in certified funds, or they would file a worthless check complaint with the state attorney's office. In our state, that's not a minor issue. A worthless check charge is a felony, which could lead to prison time. Mark pleaded with them, explaining the situation and asking for a little more time to get the money together, but they refused to budge. The accounting lady, a woman I'll call Brenda, was particularly nasty. She told him, "You committed a felony. This is policy, and we have to report it. You have until tomorrow, or we file charges." I was completely in the dark about all this. According to the law and their own lease agreement, the correct procedure was to begin the standard eviction process for unpaid rent, which would have legally given Mark 3 days to cure the issue by paying. There was absolutely nothing in their return check policy about filing criminal charges. APM called me, but only to tell me that Mark was moving out at the end of his lease and wouldn't be renewing. I immediately called Mark to wish him well, and that's when he told me the whole sordid story. I was furious. I couldn't understand why he hadn't called me directly, but there was no time for that. I called my contact at APM and was transferred to Brenda, the accountant. The conversation was tense from the start. I said, my voice shaking with anger, "What the hell is going on? This is a great tenant I've had for 3 years without a single problem. Why are you threatening him with felony charges?" Brenda's tone was dripping with condescension. "A worthless check is a felony. He committed a felony. It's our policy." "Sorry, no," I shot back. "Your policy is to follow the law. You start the eviction process and give him the standard 3 days to pay. It's his legal right. He has someone ready to loan him the money in a few days. She spoke to me like I was a child. Doesn't matter. The check bounced. It is a felony. It's our policy, and we will prosecute if he doesn't pay by tomorrow. She delivered the threat with such finality, completely unaware that in her stubborn adherence to a cruel and illegal policy, she had just sealed the fate of the entire company. It's fascinating how some people cling to the word policy as if it's a magic shield that makes illegal actions lawful. As one person later commented, policy doesn't mean it's the law. They make up whatever they feel like to be policy, and in this case, their policy was illegal, yet they still think saying policy means something. I was incandescent with rage. Let me tell you something, I snarled. This sounds like extortion. If you file that charge, you will have a very serious problem with me. I am not losing a perfectly good tenant over this. Don't you curse at me, she retorted. We're filing the charges if there's no payment tomorrow. I responded with a few more choice words and slammed down the phone. Mark was so distraught by the threats that he decided to just move in with his parents. He planned to forfeit his security deposit to cover the money he now technically owed to APM, since they had already paid me his rent. When April rolled around, I saw a deduction in my payment from APM for the $200 they'd fronted me. They had their money back. Now, I was the one who was out the cash. I emailed APM, reminding them to apply Mark's security deposit to my account to cover the loss. Their response was astonishing. They claimed the deposit was Mark's money and had to be returned to him directly. This was complete nonsense. They then informed me that they would reimburse me once they collected the money from the state attorney's office, as they had already filed the felony charge against my friend. I asked them to refresh my memory on why they took this step. Their representative happily obliged, detailing the entire story in an email: the 24-hour ultimatum, the felony, the unbending policy. They had just handed me documented proof of their extortion attempt. I didn't argue. I was past arguing. I was going to war. This was no longer just about business. It was about standing up for a good person who was being bullied. It affirmed my belief that tenants are people, not just revenue streams. I drove down to their office unannounced. Brenda was at the front desk. I told her I needed to speak with the owner. If this is about the situation with Mark, you're not seeing him, she said, her voice laced with smug defiance. I smiled coldly. That's going to be a problem, because I'm here to pull all of my properties from your company. I need the keys and all related paperwork. Now. The change was instantaneous. Her eyes widened, the smugness vanished, and her voice became a shaky whisper. Suddenly, the owner, Mr. Davies, had time to see me. He sat me down in his office, desperately trying to get me to reconsider. I laid it all out. Their actions were unacceptable, illegal, and they needed to drop the charges against Mark immediately. He wouldn't do it. I can't, he said. It's policy. This revealed the fatal flaw baked into Apex Property Management's culture, a blinding arrogance that made them believe their internal policies could supersede both the law and basic human decency. It was this arrogance that would be their undoing. That's bullshit, I told him. He doesn't owe your company a dime anymore. You've been reimbursed. He owes me the money, and I'm telling you I'm willing to take the loss. Drop the charges. He refused, so I took my keys, walked out, and officially cut all ties. But for some incomprehensible reason, they still didn't drop the case against Mark. Now I was on fire. I did a little digging in the county court records and, sure enough, found that APM had been sued before for their shady practices and had been forced to pay $20,000 to an apartment complex. I contacted the lawyer who had helped me with my first investment property and laid out the whole story, complete with the email evidence. We sued APM and filed a formal complaint with the Board of Realtors, notifying them of the lawsuit. And for the cherry on top, my lawyer requested that our case be heard by the very same judge who had presided over APM's previous lawsuit. The day in court was a sight to behold. There on the stand was the same judge, and he looked thoroughly displeased to see Mr. Davies's face in his courtroom again. The verdict was swift and brutal. APM was found guilty of extortion, violating tenant rights, and multiple other real estate laws. The judge ruled as follows. The worthless check charge against Mark was dismissed. APM had to pay Mark $15,000 in damages for extortion. They had to pay me $10,000 for damages and attorney's fees. They were fined an additional $8,000 by the court for extortion. And the final nail in the coffin, the business license for Apex Property Management and the personal real estate license of Mr. Davies were permanently revoked. Just like that, APM was finished. The owner could never legally practice real estate again. All because they were too stubborn and arrogant to be ethical. The last I heard, the owner was facing a separate criminal case for extortion. Their old office is now vacant, with a for rent sign from another realtor in the window. Mark recovered completely. He used the damages to help buy his own house. As for me, I sold off most of my properties and hired a dedicated individual I trust to manage the few I have left. The story is a stark reminder that a business built on intimidation and unethical shortcuts is built on sand. True, lasting success comes from integrity and remembering the human element in every transaction. What would you have done in my position? And have you ever had to stand up to a company that thought its policy was more important than the law?